The courtroom in Port Charles had never felt so tense. As the doors swung open on the morning of the arraignment, every eye turned toward the two women at the center of what had become the most talked-about case in the city's recent history. Willow Tate and her mother, Nina Reeves, walked through those doors knowing that their lives hung in the balance, accused of conspiracy and attempted murder in the shooting of Congressman Drew Cain Quartermain. The investigation that followed had been swift and merciless, casting suspicion on nearly everyone in Port Charles who had reason to want Drew gone, and that list was long. But as the evidence mounted, the spotlight had narrowed to focus on Willow and Nina. The gun used in the shooting, a weapon that had once belonged to Edward Quartermain, had been discovered in Willow's room at Elizabeth Baldwin's house, where she had been staying. Nina's alibi for Willow had crumbled under scrutiny when surveillance footage placed Nina in her own apartment during the time she claimed to be with her daughter. The district attorney, Justine Turner, had wasted no time in building a case that painted both women as co-conspirators in a calculated attempt to eliminate Drew from their lives. The weight of evidence. As the prosecution laid out its case, the evidence against Willow seemed overwhelming. She had motive. Drew's manipulation had cost her custody of her children, Wiley and Amelia. She had opportunity. Her whereabouts during the shooting were unaccounted for, with Lucas Jones noting she had mysteriously vanished from her shift at General Hospital that night. And now, she had means, the murder weapon found in her possession. Nina's situation was equally precarious. While she hadn't pulled the trigger, the prosecution argued that she had aided and abetted by providing a false alibi, making her complicit in the crime. The charge of conspiracy to commit murder carried its own severe penalties, and Justine Turner was determined to make both women pay. What made the case even more complex was the web of relationships that bound everyone involved. Drew had been romantically involved with both Nina and Willow at different times, a fact that added layers of betrayal and motive to the prosecution's narrative. Michael Corinthos, Willow's ex-husband, watched from the gallery with an expression that was difficult to read. Some whispered that he might have had his own role in framing Willow, planting the gun to ensure she would never regain custody of their children. The arraignment takes a shocking turn. The arraignment itself was supposed to be a straightforward proceeding, formal charges read, pleas entered, bail considered. But nothing in Port Charles ever went according to plan. As the judge prepared to hear from both sides, chaos erupted in the courtroom. Nina stood before the judge, her hands trembling as Marco, her attorney sent by Ava Jerome, stood beside her. Nathan West, recently returned from what he claimed was a 7-year absence, urged his sister to consider a plea deal. Justine had offered to reduce the charge to a misdemeanor if Nina would confess to lying about the alibi, a deal that would spare her prison time but would effectively throw Willow to the wolves. "I will not betray my daughter," Nina declared, her voice breaking with emotion. "Neither of us shot Drew Cain." But Nathan pressed harder, warning that if the case went to trial, prosecutors could argue that mother and daughter had conspired together, a scenario that could result in life sentences for both of them. The courtroom held its breath as Nina wrestled with an impossible choice: save herself by sacrificing Willow, or stand with her daughter and risk losing everything. Across the courtroom, Willow stood with her own counsel, her face pale but determined. She had already told Drew in a private moment before the hearing that she believed Michael had set her up, planting the gun to ensure she would go to prison and never see her children again. Now, as she watched her mother struggle with the decision before her, Willow felt the full weight of her situation crushing down upon her. Michael's bold statement. As the proceedings continued, Michael Corinthos rose to make a statement that sent fresh shockwaves through the assembled crowd. His declaration, delivered with cold precision, seemed calculated to influence the outcome of the case. Though the exact words varied in the retellings, those who were present agreed on one thing: Michael was making a play, a bold move that would either vindicate his actions or expose him to devastating scrutiny. Some speculated that Michael was about to confess to framing Willow, driven by guilt or by pressure from his family. Others believed he was doubling down, presenting additional evidence against his ex-wife to ensure she remained behind bars. Chase, Michael's brother-in-law and a detective with the Port Charles Police Department, watched with growing unease. He had been suspicious of Michael's role from the beginning, but without proof, his hands were tied. The truth Drew knew. What made the entire situation even more tragic was that Drew knew the truth. Through his haze of pain and medication following the shooting, Drew had maintained his certainty about one incontrovertible fact: Michael Corinthos was the one who had shot him, not Willow. Drew remembered seeing Michael's face in those crucial moments, though the details remained frustratingly incomplete. He had shared this information with Willow, promising her that he would tell the authorities the truth when the time was right. But Drew had his own reasons for delaying that revelation. In a conversation that had taken place just days before the trial, Drew and Willow had discussed a darker strategy, using Drew's false testimony to frame Michael, turning the tables on the man who had tried to destroy them both. "If I tell them I remember Michael shooting me," Drew had said, his voice low and intense, "it could be the only way to prove your innocence and get you back with your children." Willow had been conflicted. She wanted justice, wanted her children back, wanted Michael to pay for what he had done. But she also knew that such a lie, even one told to combat Michael's own deceptions, would have consequences that rippled far beyond the courtroom. The verdict. As the trial progressed through its various stages, witness testimonies, cross-examinations, closing arguments, the people of Port Charles waited with bated breath for the outcome. The prosecution had presented a case built on circumstantial evidence, while the defense had argued that Willow and Nina were being framed by forces they couldn't fully identify. Chase had continued his own investigation, trying to prove that Michael had planted the gun. But without concrete evidence, his theories remained just that, theories that couldn't sway a jury already convinced by the physical evidence and the testimony of expert witnesses. Drew watched from his wheelchair in the back of the courtroom, his body still recovering from the trauma of being shot twice. His face was a mask of bitter frustration. He had wanted to speak up, to tell the court what he knew about Michael's guilt. But circumstances, including pressure from Jen Sidwell, the crime boss who now held leverage over Drew through evidence of other crimes, had kept him silent during the crucial moments. When the verdict finally came, it fell like a hammer blow on the assembled crowd. In the case of the People vs. Willow Tate, the judge intoned, his voice grave and formal, "We find the defendant guilty of attempted murder in the first degree. The sentence is 4 years in state prison." Nina's cry of anguish cut through the courtroom. Willow stood frozen, her face drained of all color as the reality of the verdict sank in. 4 years. 4 years away from her children, from any chance of proving her innocence, from her life. In the case of the People vs. Nina Reeves, the judge continued, "We find the defendant guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. The sentence is 2 years in state prison." The aftermath. The courtroom erupted in chaos as the sentences were pronounced. Nina collapsed into the arms of her attorney, sobbing uncontrollably. Willow remained standing, rigid with shock, as court officers moved to take her into custody. In that moment, the full injustice of what had happened crashed over everyone present who knew the truth, or suspected it. Drew struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his crutches. His face was contorted with emotion, anger, guilt, determination. He pushed through the crowd, trying to reach Willow before they led her away. "Willow," he called out, his voice hoarse. "Willow, I promise you, I will appeal this. We will get you exonerated. I swear it." Willow turned to look at him, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, she made a choice. Despite everything, despite the betrayals, despite the manipulation, despite the web of lies that had brought them to this point, she placed her faith in Drew. She believed that he would keep his promise, that he would find a way to prove her innocence and bring her home to her children. "I trust you," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. "Please. Don't let my children forget me." As the officers led Willow and Nina away in handcuffs, their sobs echoing through the marble halls of the courthouse, Drew stood in the center of the emptying courtroom. His jaw was set, his eyes burning with purpose. He had made a vow, and he intended to keep it. Drew's promise of justice. In the days following the verdict, Drew threw himself into the fight for Willow's freedom with single-minded intensity. He hired the best appeals attorneys money could buy. He pressured Anna Devane and the Port Charles Police Department to reopen the investigation, to look more closely at Michael's suspicious behavior on the night of the shooting. "There's new evidence," Drew insisted in a meeting with Detective Chase. "Michael was at my house that night. Tracy Quartermain saw his car parked down the block. He had motive, opportunity, and access to the gun." Chase listened carefully, his detective's instincts telling him that Drew was right. But proving it would be another matter entirely. Michael had constructed his alibi carefully, using Jacinda, a sex worker, to provide him with cover for the crucial hours. Breaking that alibi would require more than suspicion, it would require evidence that could withstand scrutiny in court. Meanwhile, in prison, Willow struggled to adjust to her new reality. The supervised visits with Wiley and Amelia, which had been difficult enough when she was free, had now become impossible. Michael had full custody, and he made it clear that he had no intention of bringing the children to see their mother behind bars. Nina, serving her own sentence in a separate facility, sent messages to Willow through their attorneys. She continued to maintain her daughter's innocence and her own, refusing to accept any plea deal that would require her to testify against Willow. The investigation continues. As Drew pushed forward with his investigation, unexpected allies emerged. Jordan Ashford, working her own angles, began to put pieces together about Jen Sidwell's involvement in the broader conspiracy. If she could prove that Sidwell had leverage over Drew, that he had manipulated events to keep Drew silent about Michael's guilt, it might provide grounds for an appeal. Nathan West, torn between his loyalty to his sister and his commitment to justice, quietly began conducting his own investigation. His years away from Port Charles, time he claimed was spent in a cult but which many suspected involved something far more sinister, had given him skills and connections that proved useful now. Chase, working officially within the PCPD's constraints, carefully built a case against Michael. Every inconsistency in Michael's story, every suspicious coincidence, every unexplained detail, Chase documented it all, preparing for the day when he would have enough to take to the district attorney. The path to exoneration. Drew's promise to Willow became his singular focus. He knew that proving her innocence meant exposing Michael's guilt, and that meant going up against one of Port Charles's most powerful families. The Corinthos clan, led by Sonny and protected by Carly, would not take kindly to accusations against Michael. But Drew had been through too much, sacrificed too much, to back down now. He had saved Willow's life once before with his bone marrow donation. Now he would save her freedom by whatever means necessary. In his private moments, Drew reviewed his memories of the shooting over and over, trying to fill in the gaps that the trauma had created. He remembered the sound of his door opening, remembered turning with his drink still in hand, remembered the shock of recognition when he saw his attacker's face. It was Michael, Drew told his attorney with absolute certainty. I saw him. I know it was him. And I'm going to make sure everyone else knows it too. Looking forward. The legal battle ahead would be long and arduous. Appeals in the criminal justice system moved slowly, grinding through procedures and protocols with frustrating deliberation. But Drew had resources, determination, and, most importantly, the truth on his side. Willow, confined to her cell, clung to Drew's promise like a lifeline. She wrote letters to her children that Michael refused to deliver. She participated in every program the prison offered, determined to show the parole board that she was a model prisoner deserving of early release. And she waited for Drew to fulfill his vow, waited for justice to finally catch up with Michael, waited for the day when she could hold her children again. Nina, in her own facility, found unexpected strength in adversity. The woman who had spent so much of her life making mistakes, hurting people she loved, and fighting battles she shouldn't have started, now found herself with a clarity of purpose. She would serve her time with dignity, and she would support her daughter's fight for freedom however she could. The verdict had been delivered, the sentences pronounced, the prison doors closed. But the story was far from over. In Port Charles, justice, true justice, was never simple. And with Drew Kane Quartermain leading the charge, determined to expose the real shooter and free the woman he cared for, the truth would eventually come to light. The question was not if Willow would be exonerated, but when, and what the cost would be when Michael Corinthos's carefully constructed lies finally collapsed around him. As Drew had promised Willow in that heartbreaking moment in the courtroom, the appeal was coming. The fight for her freedom had only just begun. And in the complex, interconnected world of Port Charles, where family loyalty clashed with personal vendettas, where love and betrayal walked hand in hand, where the truth was often the most elusive commodity of all, nothing was ever truly settled until the final chapter was written. The trial was over, but the real battle for justice was just beginning. Next, we will learn about the brewing storm in Port Charles where Britt Westbourne's deepest anxieties could soon erupt into chaos. As fans of General Hospital eagerly await the next twists, whispers of deception and family legacies are swirling around key players, particularly involving the enigmatic Charlotte Cassadine and her potential to unleash a calculated plot reminiscent of the infamous Helena Cassadine. Helena, the matriarch of manipulation whose shadow still looms over the Cassadine dynasty, was notorious for her elaborate schemes that entangled lovers, rivals, and innocents alike, often deploying psychological warfare and hidden alliances to bend others to her will. Charlotte, now stepping into womanhood with a sharper edge honed by her tumultuous upbringing, might draw from this dark heritage to protect those she holds dear, turning a simple family visit into the spark of a larger confrontation. Picture this: Charlotte's recent rendezvous with her father, Valentine Cassadine, started on a deceptively warm note, filled with shared laughs over coffee in a quaint Port Charles cafe overlooking the harbor, where the salty breeze carried hints of upcoming drama. But as the conversation deepened, Valentine's expression shifted to one of grave concern, his eyes locking onto hers with the intensity of someone who has navigated the treacherous waters of the Cassadine world for decades. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper, and delivered a stark admonition: under no circumstances should Charlotte extend her trust to Britt Westbourne, the brittle beauty with a history of self-serving maneuvers that have left scars on many in town. Valentine didn't stop there. He stressed the urgency of enlightening Rocco Falconeri, the young boy caught in the crossfire of adult intrigues, about Britt's unreliable nature, warning that any bond forming between them could lead to heartbreak or worse. Charlotte, absorbing her father's words like a sponge in a storm, recognized the gravity behind them. Valentine, ever the strategist with his own checkered past of espionage and redemption, would never raise such alarms lightly, especially not when it involved the vulnerability of youth in their complicated family tree. The turning point came swiftly when Charlotte stumbled upon a seemingly innocuous snapshot during her digital dive into social media feeds, one that ignited her protective instincts like a match to dry tinder. The photo captured Rocco beaming alongside Britt, with Nathan West, Britt's late brother whose memory still haunts Port Charles, and the formidable Liesel Albrecht, Britt's mother, whose medical prowess is matched only by her unyielding loyalty to her daughter. In the image, they appeared as a tight-knit group at a casual outing, perhaps a park picnic or a waterfront stroll, with laughter frozen in time, but to Charlotte's discerning eye, it screamed of hidden motives and potential traps waiting to spring. This discovery fueled her resolve. She vowed silently to shield Rocco from what she perceived as Britt's encroaching influence, imagining scenarios where Britt's charm masked deeper manipulations, much like the way Liesel has orchestrated interventions in the past to safeguard her family's secrets. Charlotte's mind raced with possibilities. Maybe Britt was positioning herself as a surrogate figure in Rocco's life, filling voids left by his fractured family dynamics involving Maxie Jones and the lingering grief over Nathan's death. Yet, prying Rocco away from Britt's orbit promises to be a Herculean task, layered with emotional entanglements that could unravel Charlotte's best-laid plans. Rocco, at his tender age, has begun to warm to Britt's sophisticated yet approachable demeanor, sharing moments of innocent fun like arcade games or storytelling sessions that echo the simpler joys of childhood in Port Charles. He might dismiss Charlotte's interventions as mere jealousy or youthful overreaction, echoing the skepticism that has plagued many residents who have underestimated Britt's allure before. Think of how Jason Morgan or even Carly Corinthos have navigated her complex persona with a mix of wariness and reluctant admiration. Adding to the complexity, Britt's fixation on Rocco has blossomed into something almost maternal, driven by her own regrets over lost chances at family and stability, perhaps intensified by recent health scares or professional setbacks at the hospital that leave her seeking anchors in unexpected places. This obsession could manifest in subtle ways, like surprise gifts or late-night check-ins, making it feel genuine to Rocco while raising red flags for those who know Britt's history of using relationships as shields against her vulnerabilities. Charlotte, however, is no stranger to adversity. Her lineage equips her with an arsenal of resilience and guile that could turn the tide decisively. From her early days as a child shuttled between custody battles and shadowy Cassadine estates in Europe, Charlotte learned to read between the lines of adult deceptions, much like how Valentine once schooled her in the art of subtle observation during their rare bonding times amid international relocations. Even as a teenager, she displayed a knack for dirty tricks, such as spreading rumors in school to outmaneuver rivals or hacking into family networks to uncover truths, tactics that foreshadow her potential now as a young adult navigating Port Charles's social minefield. Matured by experiences like witnessing Valentine's romantic entanglements with Anna Devane or surviving the fallout of Lulu Spencer's coma, Charlotte has evolved into a force blending innocence with inherited cunning, her father's tactical mind merging seamlessly with Helena's flair for dramatic flair. Helena's playbook, filled with tales of brainwashing, poisonings, and forged identities that dominated General Hospital episodes for years, serves as both cautionary blueprint and tempting guide for Charlotte, who might innovate by incorporating modern twists like anonymous online campaigns or staged incidents to discredit Britt. Britt, for her part, might scoff at the notion of a mere girl like Charlotte posing a real threat, her confidence bolstered by years of outsmarting foes in high-stakes environments, from corporate boardrooms to emergency rooms where split-second decisions define survival. She's faced down cancer battles, ethical dilemmas with her mother, and romantic betrayals that would break lesser souls, emerging each time with a hardened resolve that dismisses youthful challengers as inconsequential noise. But this underestimation could prove fatal. Charlotte's approach might involve underhanded maneuvers tailored to Britt's weaknesses, such as exposing fabricated evidence of Britt's past misdeeds, like her involvement in the Caesarean plot or manipulations around Peter August, to key figures in Rocco's life, sowing seeds of doubt that blossom into isolation. Imagine Charlotte enlisting unlikely allies, perhaps a tech-savvy friend from her European schooling or even tapping into the Quartermain network for leverage, creating a web of influence that ensnares Britt before she realizes the trap is closing. As tension simmer, the question lingers, to what extremes will Charlotte venture to excise Britt from Rocco's world? Her devotion could propel her toward nightmarish escalations, like orchestrating a public scandal that tarnishes Britt's reputation beyond repair or delving into psychological ploys that mirror Helena's infamous vendettas, leaving Britt reeling from an assault she never saw coming. Port Charles has witnessed such cycles before, where family loyalties clash with personal ambitions, often culminating in explosive revelations during town events like the nurses' ball or holiday gatherings. Charlotte's campaign might ripple outward, drawing in Valentine for support, Nathan's ghostly legacy through visions or mementos, and Liesel's wrath in a mother-daughter showdown that exposes long-buried Albrecht family secrets. For Britt, accustomed to being the predator, becoming prey could shatter her fragile equilibrium, forcing a reckoning with the monsters she's unleashed in others, yet in true General Hospital fashion, redemption or retaliation always lurks around the corner. In this unfolding saga, loyalties will be tested, alliances forged and fractured, as Charlotte channels her inner Cassadine to safeguard her surrogate family. Fans, brace yourselves, the horizon darkens with possibilities that could redefine relationships in Port Charles for seasons to come. Stay tuned to ABC General Hospital spoilers for more updates on this riveting rivalry, where every whisper hides a potential explosion.